The disappearance of Bart Schleyer. Bart Schleyer was an avid outdoorsman and had completed a master's degree in wildlife biology. After he finished his degree, Bart worked for Fish and Game and the interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team in Montana. His job, along with the rest of his team, was to study grizzly bears' reaction to coming across humans in the wild. During his research, he would camp out in the wilderness for sometimes months at a time. On these trips, he would pack meat as grizzly bait and cable used for foot snares. Bart Schleyer practically lived outdoors, always wanting to study and be in the wilderness. He would use bow and arrows and was very experienced as a whole. The 14th of September 2004 was Bart Schleyer's last known contact with a float plane that had dropped him off in Canada's Yukon Territory. For this trip, Bart left carrying enough food for 2 weeks, an inflatable raft, and camping equipment. 2 weeks later, the same plane returned to pick Bart up, but he wasn't there. After being officially reported missing on the 30th of September, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police initiated a full-scale search and rescue, but didn't find Schleyer. Only some food at his camp, and his inflatable raft was found half a mile away from his campsite. With the weather turning severe in the area, the police believed Bart hiked up to the nearby highway. After this disappointing conclusion, a friend of Bart Schleyer, Dib Williams, and pilot Wayne Curry decided to fly out to the camp after the search was over to investigate further. They then found Bart's tent along with his backpack, radio, bear repellent, and a knife. Not believing that Schleyer would leave all this equipment behind and getting more worried for Schleyer's well-being, Williams, accompanied by Warner Curry, set out the next day to continue their search. After finding Schleyer's bow and arrows and a camouflage face mask with blood on, they decided to call the Royal Canadian Mounted Police back to search the area and investigate further. The police, as well as Yukon conservation officers and other volunteers, ventured back to the area on the 3rd of October. Around 60 meters or so from the location the bow and arrow was found, some clothing, a camera, and part of a skull were found. The skull was identified as that of Bart Schleyer, though no more of his body was found. Grizzly bear droppings found in the immediate vicinity led to the theory that Schleyer was the victim of a grizzly bear attack. However, conflicting opinions and lack of clothing found with bone fragments in the droppings, the fact that bears usually bury kills and no sign of a struggle led to skepticism of a bear attack being the cause. In addition, those who knew him believed he was too experienced in the wilderness to be caught off guard, and the fact that if it was a bear attack, his nearby camp would likely have been raided by the bear for food too. Furthermore, bears normally go for the head when attacking people, and no tooth marks were found on his skull. Peggy the doll. Some dolls can be extremely creepy objects, especially when they're mentioned in the context of horror. Who would ever want to see the Annabelle doll sitting in their bedroom in the middle of the night, for example? Well, as it turns out, it wasn't just the devil's chair that was causing havoc at Zach Bagans' museum. Zach has recently added the infamous Peggy the doll to his collection, which he obtained from its previous owner Jane Harris in England. It is rumoured that you can be affected by Peggy the doll just by looking at her, whether in a photograph or in real life. The doll has an undeniably twisted past. Peggy is thought to embody the spirit of a woman who died of a chest-related condition. The woman in question was said to have been born in London in 1946, and psychics have speculated that she could be of Jewish descent, as well as potentially having a connection with the Holocaust. Peggy's effects on people have been to the extreme of causing migraines to chest pains to even affecting the person's dreams. The Deadly Possessions TV show film crew felt these effects profoundly when they visited Peggy. Bagans himself said that flies manifested out of nowhere and swarmed me, and then I had a dark energy overcome me. I interviewed a woman who told me while crying she suffered a heart attack within seconds of looking at her. Anybody who wishes to view the doll at Bagans' museum even has to sign a disclaimer due to the severity of the doll's power. Now, this could all be an elaborate hoax or simply coincidental. Although demonic possession is not recognized or supported by science, there are many people who are convinced that Peggy is the embodiment of a twisted, unearthly spirit that needs to be locked safely away. Perhaps the museum is the safest place for Peggy the doll to reside, for now. One thing we can be certain of is you would most definitely not want to play with her. The Mann family. On June 19, 1978, John and Gloria Mann were driving from Reading, Berkshire to Brockworth, Gloucestershire with their 2 children, Natasha and Tanya, and John's sister Frances. They left around 9:30 that night, and they knew they should have been home by 11 since they had made the trip before. Around 10, they noticed a white light. They knew it wasn't coming from the moon, and it couldn't have been a star. They pulled over, and John got out to see if they could hear anything unusual. A red light came on beside the white one, and it moved towards them quickly. They heard a loud noise as the lights moved, almost like a train. They drove away, but they soon realized they were no longer on the same road as before. John recalled later that he got the feeling that if he had let go of the wheel, the car would have been able to drive by itself. Suddenly, they were in Farringdon, Gloucestershire, but they never remembered seeing the welcome sign like they normally did. They noticed the light behind them again, but it didn't seem to be trying to catch them. It maintained its distance and seemed to disappear whenever they passed by houses. The light had vanished completely by the time they got home. They realized it was now after midnight, although it should have only been 11 p.m. Frances went home, the children were put to bed, then John called the Air Force station to report the UFO. The next day, John tried to find the place where they first saw the light or road they ended up on the night before while driving away from it, but he couldn't find it anywhere. He wondered if they had somehow all been hallucinating, but then he noticed a rash on his chest. After showing his wife, she said she had a similar rash on her arm and leg. He called Frances and found out she had a rash as well. They also had bruises below their right knees, but they didn't know why. Their daughter, Natasha, had disturbing dreams for weeks after the incident. In her dreams, she saw people with strange-looking eyes staring at her. She said someone had taken her parents into a different room. When Gloria tried to learn more about the dreams, Natasha told her that she should already know since she was there. This convinced them that they hadn't been hallucinating after all, and John and Frances went to a hypnotherapist for help. John remembered more of that night once he was under hypnosis. After he left the car, a UFO landed in front of them. 8 creatures wearing silver suits and helmets appeared and got the women and children from the car. A column of light lifted them all off the ground, and they came to a room with several more creatures. They took John to a separate room where he sat in a chair and a bright light was put in front of him. He remembered the creatures examining him, but then he blacked out. When he woke up, he saw 3 of the creatures talking, but they were speaking in an unfamiliar language. One, named Anuxia, began to speak to him in English and told him they wouldn't harm him or his family. John and Frances both recall watching a film that showed them how the creature's planet had been destroyed by meteors. They were hoping to be able to live on Earth in exchange for their technology. They were both given a drink before leaving the ship that would help them forget what happened. The disappearance of the Beaumont children. On January 26, 1966, 9-year-old Jane Beaumont, 7-year-old Anna Beaumont, and 4-year-old Grant Beaumont got on a bus to go to Glenelg Beach from their home in Adelaide. The 3 children never returned home. This is still one of Australia's greatest mysteries to date. Their mother, Nancy, began to worry when the children didn't return by 1 p.m, and that worry grew stronger as buses returned from the beach without her children. Their father, Jim, had been away on a business trip. He returned home early that afternoon to surprise his family, but when he returned to the news of his missing children, he searched the whole area and finally went to the police. An elderly couple told the police they saw the children playing with a man on the beach. They described him as tall, blonde, and thin, and said he may have been in his 30s. Jane was known as a shy girl who was very protective of her siblings. The fact that she would play with this man shocked everyone, leading police to believe the children must have met the man before that day. Nancy remembered Anna telling her before that Jane had a boyfriend at the beach, but she didn't take it seriously at the time. Other witnesses reported that this man had been watching the children before he started playing with them. Later, he went around asking if anyone had seen the children's missing money. Some later saw the children leaving the beach with this man. Police believe he may have taken their money so he could offer them help later. He could have offered to take them home so they would see him as a sort of hero and they would trust him. Not long after they left the beach, the children at a local cake shop buying pastries and a meat pie. Their parents didn't believe the children would want to buy a meat pie because they would rather buy sweets. This also cost more money than their mother gave them that morning. It was assumed that the man they left with gave them the money and they got the meat pie for him. Descriptions of the children were released to the public, and the police received more information and reported sightings than they could deal with. All the information led them to believe the children had been kidnapped, they were hiding, or they had been in some sort of accident and perhaps drowned to death. Police searched the beach and storm drains nearby, and they drained the harbour to investigate it better. Nothing was ever discovered, however, and they had no new evidence to work with. That November, a Dutch clairvoyant named Gerard Croisset went to Adelaide after he claimed he had a vision of where their children were buried. Everyone, including Jim and Nancy, were eager about his arrival and believed he had the answers they were looking for. He led search teams to an abandoned warehouse, but nothing was found there. The case was never closed, but what really happened that day is still a mystery. After the disappearance of the Beaumont children, parents everywhere grew more cautious about letting their children go out alone. It became more and more clear that danger could be anywhere. The Girls of La Salette. La Salette, France, is a small town at the foothills of the Alps. Today it is small, but in 1846 it was a bustling hamlet with nearly 800 residents, mostly farmers and their families. Farmers were enjoying an economic boom, due in no small part to the French Revolution of 1789. Napoleon's regime stabilized economic tensions, and the introduction of new crops such as the potato and the beetroot helped improve food security and prices. In addition to these new crops, many of the families in La Salette tended to livestock such as sheep and cows. The livestock would be released into the beautiful lush pastures on the slopes of the Alps, and local children were dispatched to complete the fairly easy task of minding the herd. On September 19th, Melanie Calvat, 15, and Maximin Giroux, 11, were enjoying the sunlight of a warm fall day. The weather had not yet turned cool, and the herd of cows they were minding was grazing on the slopes about 3 miles from the nearby village. Suddenly, they noticed a woman clad in strange, vibrant clothing. She was sitting on the mountainside, weeping. The woman wore a headdress topped by a crown and a band of roses, a dress that shone with beams of light, and slippers with roses on them. She appeared bathed in a pool of light so bright it seemed to be fiery. Around her neck, she wore a golden crucifix, with a hammer and nails on one end and a pincher on the other. She continues to weep, but she called the children closer to her. Neither of them were pious, but they somehow knew this was the Virgin Mary herself. They approached as in a trance. Mary told the children that today's Catholics had strayed too far from the faith. She instructed them to respect the seventh day, which was to be set aside to rest, and to respect the name of God. If her words were not obeyed, she said, the town of La Salette would be punished by famine, in particular, a scarcity of potatoes. Of course, a French countryside gripped by the potato famine in 1845 could not handle more loss. Mary's message was timely. Melanie and Maximin dutifully took the message they received back to the townspeople, where they were quizzed individually. The stories matched, and the town's most prominent religious figures brought the apparition to the attention of the local priest. Despite threats of imprisonment from the French government, the children maintained their story. The site of the apparition was carefully investigated, and several miracles were documented. Someone broke off a rock in the place where Mary had been seated, and water flowed out. The water was used to cure a local woman's illness. Attendance at Mass skyrocketed, and by 1851, a new religious order and church was founded in the little town at the base of the mountain, the Missionaries of La Salette. Today, pilgrims travel from all over the world to visit the site of the La Salette apparition. The members of the order strive to spread Mary's message across the globe. Interestingly, all throughout history, there appears to be a number of strange and unexplainable phenomenon centered around religious gatherings and events that many find impossible to explain in the modern day. Additionally, many of these strange and mysterious religious events seem to point to the idea that perhaps our world is far stranger than we ever realized before. We may never truly understand what brings believers to such unbelievable sights. As of today, there's still whispers of these apparitions appearing to people. Whether they are genuine is up for debate, but eyewitnesses have said that they know what they saw and that whatever it was didn't come from this earth.